that either Africans have moved out of the gorilla strain. In other words, apes are our ancestors. I'm not saying that. That is not necessarily true. 99% of what humans can do, gorillas can do. The only thing that humans have that gorillas do not is an intellect that they can actually vocalize. And even gorillas, they're working on gorillas to that point where they can do that right now. And it's important that we do not shun aside, because a gorilla told me when I was in the zoo, well, what make you think I want you to be part of my heritage? Because y'all ain't acting too cool either. He said, you may think that I'm in the cage, but really you're the one in prison. Because if you notice, these folk bring me food all the time. You don't want to get to pick in the garbage cans. Now, I say this as a joke because we look at the gorilla as a lower form, but the gorilla is not a lower form. In fact, the gorilla has better sense than humans do, because gorillas know what they should eat. Humans don't. If you threw a Big Mac in a gorilla cage, a gorilla would only eat the lettuce and throw everything back in your face. So we have to be careful when we begin to characterize humanity, and you know, our ancestors never did this. And if you look at the first formation of Happy, Happy has the head of a hominid. Happy has the head of what they call a baboon. But I would dare say that if you go deeper into the significance and the symbolism of Happy, because remember where Happy is. Happy is where the Kemites claim to have originated from, the foothills of the mountains of the moon, at a place where Happy begins. And Happy in its formation has the head of a baboon, or if you want to look at it from some type of primate. So they might have known, along with the Moors understanding this, because Moors were doing laboratory work on monkeys. We can't definitively say what they were looking at, but clearly they were doing some connections between the primate and the human being, understanding the closeness of these two essences on Earth. But there are but two different peoples on Earth. There's one person on Earth, that is the African person. And in traveling around the globe, this African finds him and herself in different climates. And because of the nature of the production of vitamin D in the body, it has to begin to regulate itself. So in order to produce vitamin D, this very dark complexion, very curly-haired African begins to depigment itself. And over thousands of years, this very dark complexion, wide-nosed, thick-lipped, very curly-haired African, because of climate, depigments itself. Its hair gets straight because of the oils produced with the lack of the sun. Its nose gets aquiline, the lips get thin. And over time, this African depigments itself into the European. What also helped this African get in very serious trouble was the Wormian Ice Age, which is the last ice age on Earth. This Wormian Ice Age literally chased them into the mountains of northern Europe that we know of today. That would have been where Cheikh Anta Diop says the 51st parallel is. At that point in time, for thousands of years, in the depigmentation process, ice mountains were created. Ice mountains that did not allow Africans to return back into the southern lands. Therefore, they had to retreat into caves and put clothes on. When what is known as an interstadial came, which is a warming trend of the Ice Age, they then found the ability to begin to move further south. As they moved further south on the other side of the ice mountains, where it had been a temperate or a very warm climate, when they got down into the real southern lands here, coming out the Caucasus Mountains, they met upon peoples of different backgrounds. The great majority of them of African descent. Whether you are in Mesopotamia over here, whether you're dealing with any of the Saudi Arabian areas, this is why it's so important to understand that the European, the Eurasian as we know them today, the essence that made Saddam Hussein light complexion was called the jectanide, Jectanides. That is the formation of the Eurasian coming down, meeting these individuals in Mesopotamia, and getting a first concept of what culture and civilization is. They still couldn't get it too good because they started wars, because this was their manner. They were a very violent people. They were a very dominating people. And so they were kicked out of every town they went to as they were traveling west, and finally they find themselves in Cana, and then they cross over, which then brings this Eurasian into Kemet, and for the first time you see Eurasians in Kemet. This did not happen during the Old Kingdom. This did not happen. This happened during the first intermediate period. The Africans had gone through 6 dynasties prior to the first European of any substance coming into the land to make him or herself feel known. So all this concept about the pyramids, all that's nonsense. And I think that really, as our brother was saying, we got to stop talking on certain levels. I believe that our discussion at this point is counterproductive. See, we're not about asking them, was Egyptians black? That's yesterday's discussion. See, we dealt with that yesterday. Whether or not you're up to the par is your business. Okay, you missed a train. I didn't. I was on that train. And so now we have got to be about the formation of a nation in terms of our thought process. And this is why the Moors become so very important to us, because if you do not understand the Moors, it's very difficult for us as a people to understand why we're in the position that we're in today. You cannot understand why we're in the position we're in today if you don't understand what happened in 1492. You cannot understand what happened in 1492 if you don't understand the Crusades. You cannot understand the Crusades if you don't understand the Moors. Because the very nature of the knowledge that the Crusaders, the Christian Europeans, got of the riches of the East, why Columbus was on the seas in the first place hundreds of years later, was because of what the Moors had brought into Spain. And when you look at European powers, see, here's another way that you can look into it. See, this is why the two areas that they want to keep black folk out of in education is social studies and language arts. It's the two areas that we have to conquer. Math, science, all that's important, but those are all physical sciences that we can master anyway. But you see, social studies tells you what happened. Language arts puts it in the language that tells you what happened. And see, we're not suffering from a misunderstanding of science nor of math. We are suffering from a misunderstanding of ourselves and how to express ourselves, which falls into the category of social studies and language arts. So when I was looking for an area to find myself in Board of Ed, I immediately went to social studies because I understood that revolutionary things could happen, and they are happening. Because you got to understand the sequence of events in history. You have to see the sequence, and when you see sequence, then everything else comes to be an understanding. The Jectonites coming down into this area then mix with these African folk, and these are the people who would later become the Saddam Husseins, but deeply entrenched in an African thought. See, even Saddam Hussein is an African man, even if not by complexion, which he is by complexion. But even if they were to claim that because of their complexion, they still lived a culture that was African-based, because they as the people had no culture. They brought no culture with them. They brought no formed pattern of behavior, because it was so easy to adapt to the behavior of African people, because that's where the culture was. That's where the civilization was. That's where measurement occurred. And where measurement occurred comes mathematics and science and the formations of technology, and that's what brings the civilization through. So it's important that we understand these things in terms of understanding who we are as a people today. For instance, we teach that the Western civilization is based on the Aristotelian model. Aristotle's model of so-called democracy and all this other stuff that they taught, this is what the Western world is based on. But what they don't tell you is that it was the Moors that translated the works of the Greeks, who then taught the European Aristotle. See, we don't know that. We think that Europeans sat and studied Aristotle. They didn't. They couldn't read. The time of Moorish Spain, 99% of Europe was illiterate. Kings and queens could not read and write. They were living in barns. You see all these castles that they say these kings, those were castles built by Moors that when Europeans moved out and moved further south upon attack by Christians, they took over those. They didn't build those castles and all that other stuff. Moat with alligators. Ain't no alligators in Europe. So how are you even going to put alligators in the moat if you don't have the animal in your backyard in the first place? You see, whenever you see lions, you know you're dealing with Africa, even in The Wizard of Oz. When you hear people saying they threw people to the lions, you know you're dealing with an African concept, if not at least the lions. Because there are no lions anyplace in the world but in Africa. And as you go through Meta Nature, you will see the same thing, okay? As we begin to develop these thoughts, I think that we'll be able to move out. Now, let me ask, because I see some hands just shot up. Will we accept questions? Because normally I just open it up for a discussion. Okay, so we'll go straight, and then I'll give chance for everyone to have their say. Believe me, don't believe a word I say. Not a word. You see, I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to present information, and that's very important. Because too many of us, as we come before you, we get insulted if you don't accept it. See, I don't have no problem because I've done the research. And I know that once you challenge what we say, which I love, I'm going to challenge you to read up on it. And because I know and I'm confident that you're going to come up with the same concepts that I've come up with. We're living an illusion out here. We really are living an illusion. We are living a magician's world, like The Wiz, you know. And people have presented a world to us